Steve Faktor is a former American Express executive whose job focused squarely on these cultures of innovation, and he is the author of Econovation, the red, white, and blue pill for arousing innovation.
Over time, knowledge bleeds out of your economy. The way innovation used to happen in the United States is you would have a factory. You'd have people working in that factory. They would see parts going from one part to the other, and they would go, why does this have to go across the entire floor at 4 p.m. when everyone is working and not at 5 a.m. when the delivery is first made? So people had access to the means of understanding what was happening in order to interject innovation and process improvement and other things. Once that knowledge shifts over to someone else who's doing it, it's lost. It's not handed down generation to generation. It's not taught in schools. It goes away. Same thing with the actual physical elements of production. So China has secured, I think it was 7 to 12 rare earth minerals. And these things are incredibly important for high-tech manufacturing. And you know what? I don't think they wake up in the morning saying, well, how can I help an American manufacturer? Those kinds of things impair your ability to innovate in the future. People from Google and other technology companies went to China to negotiate opening their market to allow US companies to compete. But what were we bringing to the table? We were bringing financial services. We were bringing Twitter, Google, things that are IP-based, but also very easily copied. And there's not much incentive for China to say, oh yeah, why don't you compete with our banks? When you completely open up trade and you don't put any tariffs in, you help the companies in the short term, but in the long term, you impair the domestic market because now people aren't making enough money to buy your products. Some people almost want to interview their salmon. Where did you come from? Were you farm raised or were you raised in nature? What did you eat for breakfast? And then finally, they wanted mercifully killed by reading it Nietzsche in the original German. The groundwork has been laid for people to be conscious of local procurement. Mark Andol was a retired welder. He decided to open up a store of items manufactured in the United States. There's that element of not only local procurement, but national procurement that I think might also change sourcing habits. Because if people are noticing that they sell more goods, that might inspire a Mitsubishi or Panasonic to come and manufacture domestically. If you look at the typical grade distribution, you've got people who get A's, you've got people who get F's. They're on the periphery. And the vast majority lie somewhere in between. But if you look at the jobs that are being created, a lot of them are at the low end or at the very high end. So that's where the growth in jobs is, but really it's a mismatch with the population. We're not creating enough jobs that require people. So even if you were to build a factory in the US, chances are it would be highly automated. Education is free. One thing is not yet free: the certification of your knowledge. And the certification is a lot cheaper than $40,000 a year.
Higher skills, not degrees. The people in here are in a position to change things. You're in a position to say, hey, I don't have to hire someone who paid 50 grand a year for a diploma. Maybe we create a test and we hire people who put an effort out there and learn the skills that we need to help us in the company. In 40 to 50 years, we will look back at the millions of people hunched over laptops making PowerPoints as the most ridiculous period in our history. It'll be like you explaining to your kid, we used to get into a car, drive to a strip mall to pick up a box that had a movie on it and put it in this machine. And at the end, we'd get penalized because we forgot to rewind this box when we drove it back. The time will look at you like you're a mental patient. The way it happens is the way it's already been happening in your car. So if you look at cruise control, people think, well, just one day I'm going to get into my car, it's going to drive me place. No, it's slowly creeping in. Slowly, they've been putting a little bit more functionality into cruise control. It's a little bit more automated. Eventually, the car parks itself. And it's feature by feature kind of creeps up on you. And then before you know it, you're like, oh, I'm snacking. I'm not driving anymore. But when you have a burger in your hand instead of a steering wheel, you know the process is done. And then when you don't have to leave the house at all, then you know that the next phase is done. It doesn't all happen at once. So it's already happening to all of us. It happens with job functions before it happens to whole jobs. People think there's going to be this giant sweeping wave of firings. you're going to see a function go here, a function go there. And suddenly a person's now at 50% capacity. When their colleague retires or leaves or whatever, you just don't rehire and you consolidate two roles. So you will see a thinning of traffic because now there's one person riding to work as opposed to two. We're feeding a global mind slowly. And the problem is that global mind is fragmented because it resides in a number of different servers and different corporations. It's sort of like cell phone networks. We have the coverage to be covered in the basement of a dungeon, but we aren't because we've broken up reception among 4 different providers. Same thing that's happening with AI and data. If we had a common provider across all of that, then this thing would be evolving so much faster.
If you look at things like automobiles or mass production or railroads, those are things that fundamentally changed how we live. I think internet was probably the last thing that was like that.
So there are step innovation platforms that happen from time to time that create whole new jobs and industries. But we're in a lull right now. And I don't know how many of you have seen the Jar of Life. The idea is you put in a bunch of rocks and it kind of looks full and there's still room for pebbles. Then you throw in sand and then you're like, nothing can possibly fit in this sand ever again. And you pour water and you're like, oh my God, it's got room for water. So now a lot of us are putting in water. This is until that next leap forward. So those step innovations increase the size of the jar.
You're not putting in a whole new city. You're not putting in a whole new infrastructure, a whole new model. You're refining the model that already exists. You're putting on some solar panels, you're doing hydroponic pot in your house, but you're working with a much narrower palette. When you show up late to a medium, that doesn't mean you can't be a great practitioner, but it does mean it's a lot harder to influence. So you're smaller and your fame expires much faster. As time goes on, these things get to saturation faster and faster and faster. What percentage of your week do you spend talking about refrigeration? 4 to 6 hours, is that about right? It was a big point of conversation in 1953. But today, no one's gonna talk about refrigeration. It's part of our tapestry. That's built in. And that saturation is playing out in every facet of our lives. We've got more than enough clothes. We've got more than enough food. And I'm talking about the first world. So what happens is when things flatten out, when things stabilize, there's more of a feeding frenzy because now there's no more growth. There's no more new people showing up. So you have to chase the old people.
In 1955, the Fortune 500 was 32% of GDP. Today, the Fortune 500 is 72% of GDP. 72% of our economy is driven by 500 companies, and 50% of GDP is driven by 100 companies. So when we talk about threats to big companies, yes, there are, Coke versus Pepsi. There may be some, jousting there. There may be jousting between the telco providers. But if you look at it, barring obstructions by government or other forces, things are coagulating very, very quickly. So threats may not be so threatening in real terms. The other statistic I'll offer into this mix is 87% of startups by dollar value, it might even be higher now, are acquired by large corporations. So whether you know it or not, most startups are working for big corporations, just not yet. In the long term, if you talk about an entity that has brand, has distribution, has knowledge of the marketplace, has capital to invest, they have a serious advantage in terms of adjusting themselves. Now, that doesn't mean they will, because a lot of times culture will screw them up and they won't be able to recover. Kodak is a perfect example. A lot of people make the mistake of saying, hey, Kodak didn't know what was coming. Kodak owned more patents in digital film than anybody. They knew exactly what was going to happen. They couldn't, because of internal inertia, they couldn't bring themselves to kill off the film business. So once something is built, it will not die. It will not allow itself to die. That applies to structures and corporations. It applies to government bodies. It applies to everything. So once it is created, it will not die unless you really put an effort towards killing it. And so it's very hard. People start to defend their budgets. People start to have clout within the organization. They have political weight, and other executives don't want to take them on. So you start to grind to a halt because of all this overhead that develops. If you're someone who's working in a large corporation, math is not on your side. So let's say you come up with $100 million idea. If you're working for a multi-billion-dollar company, it's nothing. By the way, $100 million business, it is rare. And I know in the startup world, there's a lot of businesses that are valued at $1 billion, but even those guys aren't for real. So if you look at the actual number of $100 million businesses created, is very small. So if you happen to come up with one inside of a corporation, you should be a hero. They should carry you out every day on their shoulders. But here's the problem. You create a $100 million business. That doesn't happen day one. That happens in year 5. You risk adjust that. And now you find yourself fighting for budget with budgets that are $1 billion. So you're talking about a company that has a $1 billion marketing budget, and you've come up with a $100 million idea, maybe 5 years from now. And so that is the challenge in a nutshell for corporations. The life expectancy of a typical corporate innovation group is about 2 years, and a corporate venture group about 1 year. I've seen it from both sides. I've led multiple, and I've also spoken to countless executives. I do this all the time for a living. The challenge is there's a cycling that happens. So I go to these innovation conferences. Every 2 years, there's a new batch of people asking the same exact question. Obviously, something is failing because it's the same companies represented, just a different batch of people. Someone got assigned to be the chief innovation officer or some kind of innovation role, and they're walking around looking for answers. And that should not be the case. There should be clarity, and there is a way to create that clarity. But I think very few companies know how to do that. The corporate venture groups, they have a different problem. The corporate venture groups aren't used to the same type of probabilities that regular venture companies are used to, because those guys know that they need to bring in 100 companies, 1 or 2 become a hit, they've more than made their money. Those probabilities are not common in corporate. In corporate, you spend all of your time battling for resources, battling for executive authorization, battling for technology resources. And so by the time you are beaten up 6 to 9 months, sometimes even a year later, everyone expects this thing to succeed, whatever the thing is. And that starts to bleed into the logic of corporate venture groups because they need to hit those same kind of numbers that outside groups do, but they put all kinds of filters in. They're like, oh, is it strategic? So once you install all those filters, nothing's going to pop through. And the few that do make those filters will not get you the economics or the probability numbers that you need in order to make your group successful. My formula evolved over time, but eventually I got smart enough to know that the people who are about to get fired will listen the most. If they are threatened in some capacity, then they will work with you. They will give you resources. They will cooperate. They will be your best business partners and advocates. You know, you have to find places with upside. People without upside don't listen. To do real innovation, you have to be willing to hurt yourself. Chances are the thing you really need to innovate is going to compromise or threaten the business you're in some capacity. So a good example would be like Apple if they wanted to get into streaming. So maybe the right move would have been to say, hey, we'll buy Spotify before they got too big and say, this is going to be our new model. But that would compromise the iTunes model because they were still counting on selling individual songs. You tend not to see it, or you tend not to want to compromise the cash cow. Products and services are the least meaningful way of differentiating the market. Where consumer goods companies are good is in cranking out product. They're terrible at doing new business models. They're terrible at challenging themselves to innovate in ways other than product. How many permutations of sugar and corn do you need in a cereal line? But you've probably got 250 of them at least. Patenting technology is wasting a whole lot of time. A real differentiator in an organization is actually being able to take pieces that are laying around in the marketplace and make them work for you. That's a real competitive advantage. If you look at Google's products, Google acquired almost everything besides search. Google Apps, all their B2B services, pretty much all of their technology has been acquired because they know how to buy a capability and plug it into their machine. Very few companies outside of tech are very good at that kind of modularity. I think pharma companies are getting better at it because they're distributed, right? They're tied into all the health plans. They're tied into all the doctors. They're tied into everybody. So they're really just a giant distribution machine. So anything they take in from the biotech world, they can push out through their channel.
You have two choices. Either you build something super efficient, super low in labor, or you make something where you're indispensable and hyperhuman, where you amplify your humanity.
An example I want to give you is Adam Carolla. Adam Carolla does a podcast very successfully. He's one of the early podcasters using the audience that he developed. And keep in mind, this is commitment in the age of disposability. When a lot of your relationships with music, with products, with people are short-term, it is fundamentally contrarian to have a 1.5 hour relationship with somebody every day, or a 3 hour relationship with Joe Rogan, or any performer. So these are people who have connected with others in a meaningful way, that they will give them their one precious resource, which is time, at a level that other things don't seem to get anymore. And so coming from this core, he's been able to create a podcast network. He does live shows. He has movies. He has TV series. He has Mangria, which is his bottled swill. It's like sangria with a manly special ingredient, I guess. So you're talking about a way of building value around a personality that is platform agnostic. He can go to Facebook, he can go to podcasts, he can go to YouTube, he can go to any platform, and you, because you've established that relationship, will follow.
What a lot of people are mistaking about social media is they think this new portal of experiences opened up. I don't think it's that. It's a new ability to quantify the esteem that we always needed. If you're a customer that spends $10,000 a year, 1%, which is the average reward, is $100. It's a decent amount, but if that $100 is spent giving you some sort of exclusive that you really crave, then your perceived value could be $200, could be $300. So the closer you get to their passion points, the more likely they are to value or overvalue what that reward is.
The right question to be asking in a disposable world is the why question. What is the fundamental purpose of this thing? I crave meaning from the things that I get. I don't crave more stuff. The core of what we need is a core of purpose. There are things that are tapping into that right now. I call them the new religions. Religion is in decline in the West. Each successive generation is now less engaged with the thing that used to give them purpose. And now there's been a substitution effect. So people have now poured those types of religious energies into a whole new set of activities. Climate change is somebody's religion. They will argue that over and over online and with their friends to the point you want to kill them. Same thing with veganism. Same thing with running. Same thing with yoga and meditation. I know adult men in their 30s and 40s who will debate which powers what X-Men had in which comic book. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but there is a transference of religiosity to things that previously did not have it because it was provided elsewhere. So my hypothesis is that the opportunities are going to be coming increasingly in these religious spaces or things that act that way.
These religions will become disposable utilities. You get what you need from it, and you're done. When Bitcoin stops selling, it's going to go away and something else is going to replace it. That cycle is going to accelerate. How quickly we cycle through belief systems, because these belief systems don't have that binding necessity that the old belief systems had.
If you picture business as a pyramid, one side is creating the product. So you're touching the world that takes the inputs that helps you create the product. The other part is selling the product. And the other function is servicing the product. So all three of those touch the outside world, right? Now imagine a giant triangle. There's a whole lot of middleware in that triangle if you're a giant corporation. So a lot of people are actually caught up in that middle and they're floating in this abyss trying to figure out, well, what's my strategy? What should I be doing? What's our deck? So for them, it's much harder to define a mission. But the more of your people that are touching the outsides of that triangle, that are touching that outside world, the more likely they are to be satisfied because they have a connectivity to the product that the corporate people will never have. I came up with 3 characteristics of jobs that make people happy. Creating something tangible. When you leave work, you want to have something in the world to show for what you did. Otherwise, if the world looks exactly the same, what did you do? You sent a couple of emails, you had a couple of meetings. Engaging the senses. There are not a lot of great odors or things you can lick around the office. And your boss is probably not Pavarotti. So chances are your senses are being deprived for a good 8 to 10 hours a day. And the one here where a lot of jobs do well is helping others, feeling like what you've done has contributed to somebody else's success. Culture is the only thing left. Think about the things you own, the clothing, the furniture, the food, the gadgets. What percentage of the people in your life had anything to do with making those things? Hardly any, right? Very low, almost none. Most of your stuff in the first world is taken care of magically by outsourced people, by machines, by automated systems that deliver it to you. Amazon's going to have drones. There's going to be less and less human intervention delivering the products and services. That startup company, chances are, is not going to be providing the essentials of life. It's not going to be providing your food, your clothing, your shelter. It's going to be on the periphery. It may be a new way to organize your social networks, which arguably you didn't need in the first place. The challenge is, how do you address these diminishing returns? Because they have an effect on us economically, but they also have a profound effect on us psychologically.
The world used to hand us monsters to conquer. It used to give us storms. It used to give us famines. It used to give us invaders who fought with us for limited resources. But now we have to conjure our own monsters and then conquer them. If you look at these startup guys, you could just as easily earn $300,000 at Google and Facebook, whatever. No, you're going to go and try to live off Cheetos for the next 2 years because you're going to try to build a company, even though you could be earning hundreds of thousands as a developer. So you're almost recreating or simulating survivalism. Same thing with people who climb mountains or go on these crazy journeys of self-discovery. I know a guy who's very successful, very wealthy, could definitely have afforded a ticket here today, but didn't show up. And he has a list that he made of like 200 things. It's almost like a bucket list that he's doing at age 50 instead of waiting till he's too old and he actually kicks the bucket. He's a guy who's always generating tasks and goals for himself. And I don't think we have that muscle.
And so when you think about the remaining importance of the things you do inside the walls of a business, only thing that's left is the human connection. That's why you see all of these companies building jungle gyms in their offices. That's why they're all talking about employee engagement, because they know the truth. They know that their employees will check out in an instant because they'll go on Facebook and they'll surf, they'll read articles, and they'll pretend like it's for work. It's entertainment. You're entertaining yourself. Gallup did the study and they found that only 13% of employees are engaged in their jobs, actively engaged in their jobs. Others are either indifferent or actively disengaged. Imagine that, actively disengaged. Hating your job is now a full-time job. And I think what makes companies particularly stupid in this point in time that we're in is they don't know how to manage for output. We still have this factory mentality where everyone shows up at a certain time. Unless you work at a call center or some very time sensitive, or you have to open the store, most people don't need to be on the train at 9 a.m. It's ridiculous. Why do we still have a rush hour? It's idiotic. No one knows how to manage for output. No one knows how to say, we need these 3 things from you this week, and then do whatever you want. But I think the fear is letting go of legacy behavior, because once we do, we'll realize we don't need so many people working. And that's a whole other economic discussion, which we may not have time for here.
It's the inefficiency of small business that creates jobs, not efficiency. So if you think about it, if you have lots of small businesses, each one has a management team, each one has a finance department, each one has human resources. So if you have lots and lots of small businesses, it's that duplication of effort that actually creates lots of jobs.
I think that we can find work for human beings, but
No, there is work.
On the moon.
Is it work
On
of
the
necessity or work of our creation?
I believe it will be work of creation.
That's right.
Largely because a lot of the things that have been necessity will be facilitated through
Exactly.
the sorts of things you're describing. Anyway, Steve will be back. This was fun. Steve Faktor, Econovation.